Architectures of Spiritual Consciousness, the Ritual-Sacramental Mode. The Central Intuition. The Ritual-Sacramental mode begins from a claim that modern spiritual culture often finds difficult to take seriously. Sacred form can become a direct means of realization when it is deeply inhabited and allowed to transform the one who performs it. A human being is not transformed by ideas, emotions, or intentions alone. We live through bodies, gestures, repeated actions, spoken words, habits of attention, and the concrete ways in which time is divided, spaces are entered, objects are handled, promises are kept, food is prepared, and thresholds are crossed. These patterns shape the person continuously, often more deeply than conscious belief. One may understand a spiritual truth and remain largely unchanged. Love the divine intensely while daily life continues according to another order. Receive a vision whose force fades with the state that produced it, or resolve sincerely to live differently, only to discover that intention dissolves under fatigue, distraction, fear, and the changing weather of the psyche. The ritual sacramental mind understands this instability and does not ask inspiration to carry the whole path. It gives commitment a body. A time is appointed, a space is prepared, the body is washed and positioned, the sound is pronounced, the gesture is made, the offering is placed, and the sequence is repeated. The practitioner returns whether the day brings joy or dryness, clarity or confusion, devotion or emotional absence. The rite does not wait until the person feels spiritually ready. It provides a form through which sacred orientation can be entered even when feeling, insight, and will remain incomplete. Ritual frees fidelity from dependence upon mood. What is held sacred therefore receives actual time from a finite life, rather than admiration, occasional intensity, or an inward declaration that the divine matters. The person gives an hour, a movement, a sound, a substance, a bodily effort, and a repeated portion of life. The sacred is no longer left as an inward preference, it is enacted. Form as a way of knowing. Ritual is often described as the external expression of an inner truth. According to this view, the essential reality lies in belief, devotion, intention, mystical experience, or realization, while ceremony gives it an optional visible shell. The ritual sacramental mind makes a stronger claim. Form does not merely express what has already been understood. Form can disclose what thought alone cannot reach in the same way. A person may understand intellectually that the body is not separate from the sacred, yet Nyasa places mantra and divinity upon the body until this claim is enacted rather than merely affirmed. A person may believe that matter participates in divine reality, yet consecration changes how water, fire, food, fragrance, metal, image, color, and space are handled. A person may affirm that action can become offering, yet formal offering trains the concrete movement from possession toward return. One may know that speech has consequences, yet mantra treats sound as a force that shapes attention, breath, memory, embodiment, and world. One may declare that all life belongs to the sacred, yet a daily rite begins to make that belonging visible and costly. Ritual does not merely tell the practitioner that the body is divine, it trains the body to enter divine identity. It does not merely declare speech sacred, it submits speech to rhythm, breath, transmission, repetition, silence, and care. It does not merely describe the world as sacred order, it reconstructs that order through center, direction, sequence, deity, substance, image, gesture, and attention. Ritual knowledge is therefore operative. It knows by doing and understands through participation. Rather than standing outside the sacred pattern and explaining it, the practitioner enters the pattern and allows the act to reorganize the one who acts. Mantra, yantra, and mudra. Tantric traditions develop this mode with exceptional completeness because their central methods are not merely doctrines about divine reality, but forms through which that reality is embodied. Mantra gives sacred consciousness sound. It may function not only as prayer or statement, but as an operative concentration of deity, power, lineage, memory, and awareness. Through repetition, it enters breath, nervous system, inner speech, attention, and identity. Yantra or mandala gives sacred reality spatial articulation. The divine appears as center and circumference, enclosure and opening, emanation and return, hierarchy and unity. The practitioner does not merely examine a diagram from outside, but enters a world whose structure educates perception. Mudra gives sacred reality bodily form, so that gesture, posture, touch, and movement become ways of participating rather than merely external expressions of an inward state. These are joined by niyasa, visualization, puja, initiation, breath, offering, repetition, and identification with deity. Sound, body, space, imagination, substance, and action become coordinated within one sacred grammar. In such traditions, ritual is not a decorative shell surrounding the real path. The ritual is one of the principal ways the path proceeds, not merely preparation. Many spiritual hierarchies place ritual near the beginning. Beginners require forms, images, sounds, gestures, and rules. Mature practitioners pass beyond them into meditation, knowledge, devotion, or the formless. This may accurately describe the role of ritual within some paths, but it does not describe the ritual-sacramental mode from within. The mature ritualist does not necessarily abandon form. Form becomes transparent. At the beginning, the practitioner encounters clear divisions between sacred and ordinary space, ritual and ordinary time, mantra and ordinary speech, deity and practitioner, offering and possession, consecrated and habitual embodiment. These distinctions are pedagogically necessary because consciousness is initially divided. The rite creates a concentrated enclosure in which another way of inhabiting reality can be learned. The altar is therefore not the final destination, but the place where sacred perception is trained. The fixed hour teaches that time need not remain available only for work, appetite, consumption, and accident. The image teaches that form can bear presence. Mantra teaches that speech is not spiritually neutral. Mudra teaches that gesture can become conscious participation. Offering teaches that possession can become return. Nyasa teaches that embodiment itself can become a field of realization. If the practice matures, these distinctions gradually become porous. The altar ceases to be the only center. The body no longer feels sacred only during nyasa. Speech no longer appears consequential only during mantra. Offering no longer ends once ritual substances have been placed. The practitioner stops moving endlessly between a perfect sacred enclosure and an untouched profane remainder. Ritual begins by setting apart a sacred act. It reaches maturity when the pattern of that act expands into life. From performing the pattern to living within it. At first, the practitioner performs the rite by remembering the sequence, consulting the manual, counting repetitions, correcting pronunciation, preparing substances, and attempting to hold visualization, posture, gesture, sound, and intention together. The act feels constructed because it is still apprenticeship. A musician repeats scales before music becomes fluid, and a martial artist repeats forms before the body can respond without conscious calculation. In the same way, a ritual practitioner repeats sacred action until the pattern passes beneath conceptual effort and becomes embodied intelligence. The decisive movement occurs when ritual ceases to be merely something the practitioner does and begins to form the practitioner. Mantra alters the quality of inner speech. Mudra changes the relation to gesture. Offering changes the relation to possession. Consecration changes the handling of matter. Sacred time changes the experience of continuity. The altar changes the relation to space and center. Repeated return changes the meaning of commitment itself. The mechanism does not automatically produce the fruit. Repetition alone cannot guarantee realization. Yet deeply inhabited repetition can reach layers of the person that isolated insight or emotional intensity frequently leave untouched. What is repeatedly enacted begins to reorganize what feels natural. The ontological claim. The ritual-sacramental mode cannot be reduced to psychological conditioning, although it undoubtedly forms habit, attention, emotion, and bodily memory. Its claim is stronger. Sound, body, image, matter, space, and action can genuinely participate in sacred reality. Mantra is not only a concentration technique. A consecrated image is not merely a projection surface for imagination. Offering is not only an exercise in relinquishment. A mandala is not merely a visual metaphor. Ritual is not simply an educational drama arranged for the practitioner's psyche. At its height, the mode understands form as an articulation of reality itself. Sacred consciousness takes sound, presence takes shape, non-separation becomes enacted through differentiated action. Matter becomes capable of bearing and revealing more than private use. This does not require crude magical literalism, but it does require refusing the modern assumption that meaning exists only within an isolated subject while matter remains spiritually dead. Human beings already know that matter can become relationally dense. A wedding ring is metal, but not merely metal. A grave is earth, but not merely earth. A handwritten letter may carry a person's presence differently from an identical transcription. A family table may become a center of memory, and a threshold may bear the weight of departure and return. The ritual sacramental mode extends this participatory capacity toward the sacred. The rite does not merely represent a reality absent from the act. The act may become a site in which that reality is encountered and embodied. The disappearance of the profane remainder. The mature fruit of ritual is not the ability to perform more elaborate ceremonies than others, accumulate initiations, remember longer sequences, or spend more hours before an altar. It is a life in which fewer actions remain outside consecration. Every word becomes capable of mantra, not because every sentence acquires magical power, but because speech is no longer treated as spiritually insignificant. Every gesture becomes capable of mudra, not because spontaneous movement imitates formal hand positions, but because the body is no longer used carelessly. Every action becomes capable of offering, not because all conduct is automatically sacred, but because every action becomes answerable to what is sacred. Every encounter enters the mandala, and every responsibility becomes part of practice. The practitioner can no longer divide life by saying that puja is sacred while domestic life is merely ordinary, that offerings matter while money and promises belong to a worldly realm, that the body is divine during ritual while exhaustion and illness may otherwise be ignored, or that an image is the goddess while the living person before them remains an interruption. Care for an ill child may become puja. Preparing food may become offering. Keeping a promise may become ritual truthfulness. Resting an exhausted body may become reverence for embodied divinity. Work may become yajna, and attention may become consecration. The formal rite may remain the concentrated heart of practice, where the pattern is renewed, clarified, and intensified. It is no longer, however, an isolated island. The ceremony ends, but the ritual continues. The central demand. This promise places an immense demand upon the practitioner. If every word is to become mantra, ordinary speech must become more truthful. If every gesture is to become mudra, conduct must become more conscious. If every action is to become offering, possession and self-interest must be transformed. If the body is divine, it cannot be worshipped ceremonially and violated carelessly. If every being belongs to the mandala, another person cannot be treated as spiritually irrelevant. If the whole life becomes ritual, nothing can remain conveniently outside spiritual judgment. The path is therefore not fulfilled when the prescribed sequence is completed. It is fulfilled when the meaning of the sequence passes into perception, embodiment, relationship, and action. Its central intuition can be stated simply: the sacred must be given a repeatable embodied form if it is to shape the person across time. Its greater promise follows. Through deeply inhabited sacred action, body, speech, attention, space, time, and substance can become transparent to divine reality. Its mature fruit is the expansion of the rite until every word becomes capable of mantra, every gesture becomes capable of mudra, every action becomes capable of offering, and the whole life becomes sacrament. What the ritual sacramental mode is not. The ritual sacramental mode is easily misunderstood because its outer forms are visible. A person may light lamps, repeat mantras, bow, arrange offerings, draw diagrams, wear sacred marks, follow exact sequences, and maintain a demanding daily practice without having entered sacramental consciousness. The same gesture may arise from reverence, habit, fear, social expectation, aesthetic pleasure, magical ambition, obedience, identity, or genuine participation. The decisive question is not merely what is being performed, but what relation among form, consciousness, body, and world is being enacted. Ritual sacramental consciousness begins when sacred form becomes an operative way of participating in reality. It is not mere externalism. The most familiar criticism of ritual is that it concerns only outward action. The practitioner performs gestures, pronounces sounds, handles objects, and follows inherited rules while the inward life remains untouched. This criticism is sometimes accurate, but it does not define ritual. It describes ritual's failure. Mature ritual does not oppose outward form to inward transformation. Its purpose is to bring them into relation. The body acts so that consciousness may be trained. Sound is pronounced so that breath, speech, memory, and attention may be gathered. An offering is placed so that possession may become relinquishment. Sacred space is entered so that perception may cease to treat all places as interchangeable. The rite becomes superficial only when outward exactness no longer penetrates the person. External form is not the enemy of spiritual depth, unassimilated form is. Ritual may begin outside because the body must learn what the mind cannot yet sustain continuously, but its mature movement is inward and outward at once. Form enters consciousness, and consciousness reshapes conduct. It is not habit. Habit and ritual both rely upon repetition, but they can move in opposite directions. Habit often allows consciousness to withdraw, while ritual asks repeated action to become increasingly inhabited. The sequence may enter bodily memory, but the purpose is not automation. The body remembers, so attention can enter more deeply. A rite performed for years can nevertheless become habitual in the worst sense. The hands move while the mind wanders. The sequence is completed because stopping would produce guilt, fear, or social consequences. Conversely, an ordinary action may acquire ritual depth when it is performed through recurrence, form, attention, and consecrated meaning. Preparing tea, cleaning a room, entering a training space, beginning daily work, or caring for the body can become ritualized without belonging to formal religion. The distinction is not simply between religious and ordinary action, it is between unconscious repetition and embodied return. Habit says that presence is no longer required. Ritual says, through returning, I am learning how to become present. It is not devotional expression alone. Devotion and ritual frequently interpenetrate. A devotee lights a lamp because the beloved is loved, offers food because it is intended for the beloved, repeats a name because remembrance gives joy, dresses an image with tenderness, and bows because the heart wishes to surrender. In such acts, the governing operation may remain relational. The devotee primarily asks how the action can express love. The ritual sacramental mind asks how the action establishes and embodies sacred participation. A single offering may be simultaneously devotional and ritual, but the modes organize it differently. For devotion, sincerity of relationship may outweigh technical imperfection. For ritual, sound, placement, preparation, sequence, and the relation among elements may matter beyond the practitioner's present feeling, because the act is not merely private expression, it participates in a received sacred grammar. The ritualist may therefore continue when emotion is absent. The rite is not only the visible overflow of feeling, but a form through which body, memory, attention, emotion, matter, and world can become aligned. Devotion gives ritual warmth. Ritual gives devotion, duration, and embodiment. Neither can be reduced to the other. It is not magical control. Ritual traditions frequently speak of efficacy. Sounds, gestures, diagrams, offerings, substances, times, and sequences may be directed toward protection, purification, healing, prosperity, divine contact, transformation, power, or liberation. This creates the temptation to turn ritual into spiritual mechanics, in which the practitioner performs the correct operation and expects reality to obey. Mantra becomes an instrument, deity, a power to activate, offering a payment, and purity, a qualification for leverage. The mature sacramental operation is different because its deepest movement is participation rather than domination. The practitioner does not stand outside sacred reality and manipulate it through technique. They enter a pattern that also transforms them. The offering changes the one who offers. The mantra changes the one who speaks. Consecration changes the one who handles matter, and the mandala repositions the one who enters it. Magic asks how sacred form can make reality serve the practitioner. Sacrament asks how sacred form can make the practitioner capable of serving reality. This does not deny that rites may seek concrete effects. It means that efficacy alone does not establish spiritual maturity. A ritual may apparently work while leaving the practitioner inflated, frightened, possessive, or ethically unchanged. Power is not realization. It is not aesthetic theater. Ritual can be beautiful. Flame, fragrance, architecture, vestment, music, color, sacred language, icon, and ordered movement may gather attention and give form to reverence. Beauty matters, but ritual is not merely spiritual theater. The practitioner may become absorbed in ceremonial splendor, rare materials, dramatic movement, expensive temples, perfect decoration, costume, or public performance. The rite then becomes a display of status, artistry, institutional prestige, or cultural refinement. This does not make beauty false. It reveals a reversal of purpose. Beauty should open perception. It should not become proof that sacred participation has occurred. A simple rite may be deeply inhabited, while an elaborate one may require complexity because it coordinates many real layers of meaning. Neither simplicity nor splendor guarantees maturity. Beauty serves ritual when it clarifies participation. It distorts ritual when spectacle substitutes for transformation. It is not technical competence. Complex ritual systems may demand extraordinary memory, patience, bodily coordination, linguistic precision, intelligence, and sustained work. A practitioner may master mantras, nyasas, mudras, offerings, visualizations, diagrams, correspondences, ritual languages, initiatory rules, calendrical timing, and methods of purification. Such mastery deserves respect. It is not, however, identical with realization. A person may perform a rite flawlessly while remaining rigid, narcissistic, dishonest, frightened, exploitative, or spiritually dull. The competence is real, but the conclusion drawn from it may be false. Mastery of the vessel is not possession of what the vessel contains. The ability to perform a rite proves the ability to perform that rite. It may also demonstrate endurance, memory, discipline, concentration, and attention to detail. It does not by itself prove transformed perception, ethical maturity, humility, divine vision, non-dual realization, or divinization. Knowledge of the sequence cannot substitute for assimilation of its meaning. The rite must enter the person. It is not authorization, antiquity, or custodianship alone. Ritual traditions often require transmission. A practitioner receives instruction, enters a lineage, observes rules, and may require initiation before performing certain rites. This can preserve complexity and protect forms from arbitrary alteration, but authorization is not realization. A person may obey through fear, dependence, institutional pressure, desire for status, hope for promised attainment, or distrust of personal judgment. Transmission deserves respect, yet human authority must not be identified with the sacred pattern itself. A teacher may preserve a form but does not own the reality toward which it points. A lineage may transmit a method but cannot guarantee the consciousness required to inhabit it. Antiquity carries the same ambiguity. A practice preserved for centuries may contain accumulated intelligence. It may also continue mechanically after its meaning has become opaque. Age alone does not make a form spiritually alive. Complex traditions also require custodians who preserve texts, pronunciation, sequence, symbolism, architecture, and transmission. This work is necessary, but the custodian is not automatically a realized practitioner. Preservation becomes distortion when custody becomes ownership, secrecy becomes capital, initiation becomes property, and technical knowledge becomes authority over the sacred itself. The mature custodian preserves the vessel while remembering that the sacred exceeds every vessel. It is not compulsion or quantity. Ritual asks the practitioner to continue beyond mood, which is one of its greatest strengths. Yet continuation alone does not establish fidelity. Compulsion can appear nearly identical from outside. Both the faithful and the compulsive practitioner rise at the appointed hour, resist distraction, and complete the sequence despite fatigue. The inner movement differs. Fidelity refuses to abandon what matters merely because the present mood resists it. Compulsion refuses to let any signal from the body, conscience, consequence, or changing life revise a past commitment. Fidelity stabilizes freedom across time. Compulsion makes a former vow permanently sovereign over the living person. A mature practice can survive boredom, dryness, and resistance while also adapting to illness, age, injury, responsibility, and genuine transformation. Its form remains stable without becoming lifeless. Quantity creates a related danger because repetitions, hours, years, vows, initiations, and uninterrupted cycles can be counted, while transformation cannot. Because the means are measurable, the practitioner begins to treat the fruit as though it has also been measured. Yet the conclusion does not follow. The count establishes that the count was completed. It does not certify the soul. Duration and repetition matter because formation requires time, but quantity creates conditions. It does not issue a certificate of divinization. It is not symbolic representation alone. Modern interpretation often reduces ritual to symbolism. The flame represents consciousness, the offering represents surrender, the mandala represents the cosmos, and the deity represents an archetype. Ritual becomes a visual language for truths that could otherwise be stated conceptually. Symbols certainly matter, but the sacramental claim is stronger. The act does not merely represent a reality absent from the performance. The practitioner may participate in that reality through the act. An offering is not only a symbol of relinquishment, something is actually given. A mandala is not only a diagram of the cosmos, it is a field entered bodily and imaginatively. Mantra is not merely a symbolic name, it is enacted sound through which presence, identity, and attention are gathered. The body is not merely compared to a temple, it is ritually inhabited as one. A map may describe a path, a ritual asks the practitioner to walk it. It is not a lower path. Ritual is often treated as incomplete until it gives way to contemplation, devotion, knowledge, or direct realization. Form belongs to those who have not yet reached the formless. The ritual-sacramental mode rejects this hierarchy. Form need not oppose realization. Form may become transparent to realization. The body need not be abandoned, it may become conscious participation. Speech need not be absolutely silenced, it may become mantra. Action need not be escaped as bondage, it may become offering. Matter need not remain inert, it may become sacrament. The mature practitioner does not merely use form as a ladder and discard it. They discover the sacred through form until form and presence no longer appear opposed. The real distinction is not between ritual and realization, but between ritual performed from separation and ritual arising as realized participation. The distinctive movement. The ritual-sacramental mode may contain devotion, repetition, symbolism, beauty, transmission, magical efficacy, authority, discipline, and technical precision, but none of these defines it alone. Its distinctive movement is the transformation of consciousness through repeated embodied participation in sacred form. The practitioner does not merely believe reality is sacred. They train body, speech, attention, time, space, imagination, and action to inhabit that sacredness. They do not merely admire fidelity, they give fidelity a schedule. They do not merely affirm that the body is divine, they consecrate embodiment. They do not merely declare that life is offering, they practice offering until possession and action beyond the rite begin to change. The mature question is therefore not how accurately the ritual was performed, how many repetitions were completed, how ancient the form is, or how impressive the tradition appears. It is, has the sacred pattern passed from the ceremony into the whole life? The counterfeit ritualist perfects the rite. The mature ritualist allows the rite to transform the one who performs it. The world from within. From within the ritual-sacramental mind, reality is not spiritually neutral. Time is not merely duration, space merely extension, speech merely communication, the body merely biological matter, objects merely tools, or gestures merely movements. Actions do not become sacred only because the practitioner feels something while performing them. They may possess form, relation, sequence, weight, and consequence before the practitioner fully understands them. The ritual mind experiences the world as patterned. Certain sounds belong with certain gestures. Certain acts require preparation. Certain spaces must be entered differently. Certain thresholds cannot be crossed casually. Certain substances must be handled with reverence. Certain moments gather meanings that ordinary time does not carry. The practitioner therefore does not ask only what is true, whom they love, or what has appeared. They ask what must be done, how it must be done, what form makes participation possible, what must be prepared or relinquished, and what relation among body, sound, substance, space, and attention allows a sacred pattern to become present. From outside, this concern can appear excessively formal. Why should direction matter? Why one sound rather than another? Why this sequence? Why should 1 hour differ from the next? From within the mode, such questions resemble asking why musical notes must occur in a definite relation, why architecture must distribute weight correctly, or why a martial form cannot be assembled from arbitrary movements. The rite is not a collection of sacred objects and acts. It is an ordered whole, whose meaning arises through relation. Qualitative time. Modern time is largely quantitative. It is divided, counted, scheduled, spent, saved, wasted, and exchanged. 1 hour resembles another, except for the activity placed within it. Ritual time is qualitative. Dawn is not merely an early hour, dusk not merely the decline of light, a lunar phase not merely an astronomical position, and a festival not merely a commemorative date. A fast vigil, initiation day, anniversary, seasonal turning, Sabbath, or daily hour of worship may become a threshold through which ordinary continuity opens into another order. Repeated observance deepens this quality. A particular hour becomes associated with awakening, invocation, silence, offering, memory, or return. The practitioner no longer needs to recreate its meaning each day because the hour itself begins to call body and attention into a familiar orientation. Ritual time therefore carries the person. They may arrive distracted, exhausted, emotionally flat, or resistant, yet the repeated hour contains memory accumulated through previous returns. The room changes, the voice changes, objects are handled differently, ordinary activity is interrupted, and a boundary appears within the flow of the day. That boundary declares that this portion of life will not be left entirely to appetite, urgency, work, entertainment, and accident. It has been set apart. At maturity, however, sacred time cannot remain confined to the appointed hour. The rite distinguishes 1 hour, so the practitioner may eventually recognize every hour as finite, received, and capable of consecration. Ritual begins by setting apart time. Its mature fruit is a transformed relation to time itself. Sacred space. The ritual mind also experiences space as structured through center and periphery, inside and outside, entrance and enclosure, direction and orientation, height and depth. The altar is not placed without consequence, the threshold is crossed with attention, and the body occupies a position within a sacred pattern. A temple, shrine, altar, sanctuary, mandala, or fire pit creates a field in which movement becomes meaningful. The center may signify deity, presence, origin, stillness, or emptiness. The perimeter may protect, differentiate, or reveal multiplicity around unity. Directions may correspond to elements, guardians, powers, stages, or forms of consciousness. To approach the center is not merely to cross physical distance. It may enact concentration, surrender, descent, ascent, or identification. Sacred space gives metaphysics a body. Unity and multiplicity become spatial. Emanation and return become traversable, and a hierarchy of powers becomes visible. The practitioner stands inside what philosophy describes. A temple or mandala does not merely illustrate an idea, it makes the idea inhabitable. At maturity, sacred space expands. The altar teaches attention to center. The temple teaches that space can hold presence. The mandala teaches that every point exists in relation to a whole. The body may become temple, and the world mandala. The sanctuary remains, but now as the concentrated place where a wider sacred orientation is learned. Speech as power and participation. Ordinary speech is frequently treated as a transparent vehicle of meaning. Words communicate information, and their value depends largely upon what they say. The ritual-sacramental mind gives sound a more substantial role. A mantra is not merely a statement about the sacred. Its sound, rhythm, sequence, breath, repetition, and transmission belong to its identity. The practitioner pronounces it, hears it, feels its rhythm, coordinates it with breath, and repeats it until deliberate speech and inward resonance begin to approach one another. Sound enters the body before it becomes philosophy. It interrupts ordinary inner speech, carries memory, establishes continuity, gathers attention, and may evoke deity, power, lineage, state, or presence. Within tantric ritual, mantra may be understood as one of the deity's operative forms, so the distinction between invoking the deity and sounding the mantra becomes less absolute. The practitioner is not merely speaking toward sacred reality is being allowed to take form through speech. This is why pronunciation, rhythm, sequence, and transmission may matter so deeply. The sound is received rather than privately invented, yet mature mantra does not produce permanent anxiety over correctness. It changes the practitioner's entire relation to speech. Words are no longer casual emissions without consequence. They shape memory, attention, relationship, trust, identity, and world. Truthfulness becomes ritual precision. Silence becomes part of speech. A promise becomes consecration. An insult becomes desecration. And a blessing becomes offering. Mantra begins in prescribed sound. Its mature fruit appears in the whole life of speech. The body as temple and instrument. The ritual body is prepared, washed, marked, positioned, regulated, visualized, and consecrated. Through nyasa, mantras, powers, deities, or sacred functions may be placed upon it. The body may be inhabited as temple, cosmos, mandala, or seat of divine presence. Most people inhabit embodiment through largely unconscious habit. Posture is automatic, breath follows tension, and gesture expresses fear, urgency, aggression, submission, or social conditioning without being noticed. Ritual interrupts this automatic embodiment. The hands move deliberately, the spine is positioned, the breath is noticed, the eyes are directed, and the body bows, circles, offers, receives, opens, touches, and becomes still. A bow can express relinquishment, an open hand become offering, a circular movement enact relation to a center, a posture establish continuity beyond mental fluctuation, and a gesture condense an entire cosmology. The body learns structures that explanation alone cannot transmit. At first, the practitioner imitates. Later, the form becomes embodied intelligence. Eventually, action may arise with less division between intention and movement. The mature ritual body is therefore not rigidly controlled at every moment. It has been formed deeply enough that posture, rhythm, attention, and movement can become spontaneous without becoming careless. The body no longer carries spirituality as an idea imposed from above. It participates. Matter as bearer of presence. The ritual world does not treat matter as spiritually inert. Water purifies, fire receives and transforms, food is offered and returned, fragrance alters atmosphere, flowers carry beauty and impermanence, ash signifies dissolution, color differentiates powers, and stone or metal may become bodies of presence. A consecrated image is not approached merely as a visual aid for those unable to contemplate abstractly. It may become a genuine site of encounter. Consecration establishes a field in which matter is handled, perceived, and related to differently. An offering becomes more than private property, an image more than decoration, a flame more than combustion, and water more than utility. The formal rite teaches that matter is not dead. At maturity, this perception cannot remain limited to officially consecrated objects. Food, clothing, tools, homes, bodies, landscapes, and ordinary things are handled with greater care because they participate in life rather than merely serving consumption. The practitioner begins by consecrating selected matter and may end by losing the capacity to treat the world as disposable. A sacramental vision does not escape matter, it discovers matter as capable of participation. Sequence, transmission, and inheritance. Ritual action unfolds through order. Preparation precedes invocation. The field is established before the center is approached. Purification precedes offering. Powers are placed, obstacles removed, and deity invoked, welcomed, worshipped, internalized, recognized, or released according to the tradition. The sequence matters because the act is developmental. One does not begin at the end. The practitioner is gradually brought from ordinary orientation into sacred participation. This teaches a difficult truth. Transformation often requires an order that the present self did not invent. Modern spirituality often treats spontaneity as inherently authentic because it arises immediately from the individual. Ritual distrusts this assumption. What arises spontaneously may express depth, but it may also express habit, appetite, vanity, fear, distraction, or avoidance. A transmitted form interrupts the sovereignty of present mood. The practitioner enters an order whose meaning may exceed immediate comprehension and learns partly by participation. This is also why ritual rarely imagines spiritual life as wholly private invention. The mantra was sounded before the present practitioner was born, the gesture preserved, the sequence refined, and the temple plan calendar offering form and initiation carried across generations. The practitioner enters an existing stream. They did not create the path and may not yet understand everything it contains. The form may possess an intelligence greater than present preference. This can relieve the burden of continual spiritual self-invention. A grieving person may not know what to say, but the rite gives words. A community facing death may not know how to remain present, but the sequence gives action. A practitioner whose emotional life has gone dry may not know how to return, but the form remains. Inheritance gives fragility a vessel, yet the form does not belong absolutely to its custodian. It is received, embodied, interpreted, perhaps adapted, and transmitted onward. Repetition and deepening. The ritual practitioner returns to the same mantra, bow, offering, sequence, and hour. From outside, this may appear to be a failure of creativity, but repetition need not produce sameness. The form remains relatively stable while the practitioner changes. The same bow performed in youth, grief, pride, illness, maturity, and approaching death is not inwardly identical. The same prayer may first be recited mechanically, then understood, loved, doubted, and rediscovered. The form becomes a vessel through which changing life is brought into relation with something stable. Repetition reaches layers of the person that one-time insight rarely transforms. A single act of attention may be profound, but repeated attention may become character. The practitioner learns to continue without enthusiasm and encounters resistance to precision, patience, stillness, surrender, and commitment. Because the form remains stable, it becomes a mirror of changing states. Repetition is not fulfilled by indefinite accumulation, its purpose is assimilation. The same form should become more transparent, embodied, integrated, and expansive. The rite is repeated until its central pattern begins to appear beyond the rite. A field of participation. Taken together, sacred time, space, speech, body, matter, sequence, transmission, and repetition create a distinctive world. The practitioner does not experience themselves as an isolated mind using symbols for private psychological purposes. They enter a field in which deity, mantra, altar, body, teacher, substance, gesture, lineage, community, and cosmos are related. The meaning of each element arises through participation in the whole. The individual does not generate the sacred field through personal emotion alone. They step into it. Devotion may animate the rite, but the rite does not depend entirely upon devotion. Vision may occur, but the rite does not depend entirely upon vision. Metaphysical understanding may deepen participation, but the rite does not depend entirely upon conceptual mastery. Body supports attention, sound carries memory, space supports visualization, sequence supports concentration, substance gives offering material reality, community preserves what the individual forgets, and repetition allows time for assimilation. The rite is a coordinated ecology of transformation. At its height, these no longer feel like separate techniques. They become one act. The central ritual question is therefore not simply whether an action symbolizes the sacred, it is how must I participate so fully that the sacred pattern enacted here becomes the pattern through which I live. The central operation and mature fruit. The central operation of the ritual-sacramental mind is the conversion of sacred intention into repeated embodied participation. A person may sincerely believe life is sacred while moving through most of the day unconsciously. They may affirm the body as divine while treating it as a machine to exploit, speak of offering while remaining possessive, praise sacred speech while speaking carelessly, or describe the world as a manifestation while treating matter as disposable. Ritual refuses to leave spiritual truth at the level of conviction. It gives truth a form that must be enacted. The practitioner does not merely think that the body is sacred, but washes, positions, marks, touches, and consecrates it. They do not merely believe speech carries power, but submit it to mantra, breath, rhythm, silence, restraint, and repetition. They do not merely admire surrender, but place something valued upon the altar. They do not merely declare that time belongs to the sacred, but return when the appointed hour arrives. Ritual begins by making the sacred concrete. Its deeper work is to repeat that concreteness until ritual truth and lived reality begin to approach one another. From intention to enactment. Intention is unstable. A person decides in the morning to live attentively and forgets by noon. They feel gratitude during prayer and return immediately to urgency, resentment, and unconscious habit. They receive an insight but possess no form through which it can reorganize daily conduct. Ritual creates continuity between what the person values and what they repeatedly do. The act may initially feel artificial because the practitioner bows before humility is fully present, offers before possessiveness has disappeared, repeats mantra while the mind wanders, and consecrates the body while still feeling divided from it. This does not automatically make the act false. The ritual form may be ahead of the practitioner. It embodies a possibility not yet stabilized inwardly. A person learning generosity may begin by giving before generosity feels natural. One learning stillness may assume a posture before the mind becomes still. One learning reverence may perform reverence before the corresponding emotion matures. Form can provide a provisional body for a consciousness still developing. The direction nevertheless matters. Outer form must gradually awaken inward correspondence. If no such movement occurs, enactment becomes substitution. Sacred separation. Ritual often begins by establishing a boundary. This hour is set apart, this space prepared, these objects consecrated, this body purified, this sound distinguished from ordinary speech, and this sequence protected from casual action. This separation may appear to contradict the mature claim that all life can become sacramental, but the boundary has a pedagogical purpose. A scattered mind cannot immediately inhabit every moment as sacred. It needs concentration. The altar gathers what ordinary life disperses. The temple creates an enclosure in which another perception can stabilize. The appointed hour protects practice from endless demands, and the sequence removes the need to invent an approach each day. Sacred separation creates a laboratory of participation. The mistake is not beginning with separation, but making separation permanent. If the altar remains the only sacred place, speech sacred only during mantra, and the body divine only during ritual imagination, the rite has not crossed its boundary. The sacred enclosure is meant to train expansion, repetition, and embodied intelligence. At first, every movement requires conscious effort. The practitioner remembers the sequence, corrects mistakes, and struggles to hold attention. Over time, the form enters memory, posture, breath, expectation, and identity. The body begins to know what the conscious mind once had to command. As in music, craft, language, or martial training, the sequence gradually becomes continuous. Attention can then enter subtler dimensions because the basic form no longer consumes all conscious effort. The aim is neither clumsy deliberation nor unconscious habit, but inhabited fluency. The body knows the sequence while attention remains present. The practitioner no longer thinks about every movement, yet the movements continue to carry meaning. The rite ceases to feel assembled and becomes one field of sound, breath, image, substance, gesture, and attention. Form becomes mature when it creates spontaneity without unconsciousness. The education of attention. Ordinary attention is captured by novelty, threat, desire, irritation, and interruption. Ritual asks it to return to forms that may no longer be novel, the same flame, mantra, icon, gesture, and sequence. This initially produces boredom because the mind expects stimulation, yet repetition reveals that boredom often belongs less to the object than to the quality of attention brought to it. The practitioner remains long enough for superficial familiarity to give way to depth. Details appear, relations become clearer, bodily resistance is revealed, and the mantra changes with breath, fatigue, grief, anger, devotion, and clarity. Because the form remains stable, it exposes fluctuation. One day the practitioner is reverent, another resentful, another distracted, and another clear. The rite does not necessarily remove these states, it reveals them against a constant background. Attention is educated not by producing one correct emotion, but by learning to see what is present without immediately abandoning the form. The person does not need to feel devotion in order to discover what its absence reveals, nor concentration in order to see distraction, nor surrender in order to encounter resistance. The rite becomes a mirror through recurrence. The education of body, speech, and possession. Ritual works through the body before conceptual understanding is complete. The body bows, sits, stands, turns, touches, offers, receives, waits, and repeats. These actions create an embodied vocabulary in which a bow may begin as compliance and become relinquishment. A gesture of offering may begin as imitation and become another relation to possession, and a posture may begin as discomfort and become bodily steadiness. In tantric ritual, this education becomes explicit through nyasa, mudra, visualization, and identification with deity. The practitioner reconstructs embodiment according to a sacred pattern. The body ceases to be merely personal property or biological accident and becomes temple, mandala, instrument, and field of presence. The ceremonial body, however, cannot remain separate from the actual body. If the body is divine during nyasa, then illness, fatigue, sexuality, aging, and limitation must also be treated with seriousness. Ritual divinization is incomplete, while the ceremonial body is worshipped and the actual body is ignored. Speech undergoes a parallel education. Mantra trains precision, rhythm, listening, silence, repetition, and restraint. Ordinary language is often impulsive. People exaggerate, flatter, manipulate, wound, complain, and fill silence unconsciously. Mantra demonstrates another possibility in which speech becomes deliberate, received, heard, as well as spoken, and capable of gathering rather than dispersing consciousness. Its mature fruit is not perfect recitation alone. Ordinary speech must reveal the discipline. Truthfulness becomes precision, a promise becomes consecration, an apology becomes purification, and silence becomes restraint. Offering transforms possession in the same way. The practitioner takes food, water, fragrance, money, labor, time, or attention and places it into sacred circulation. The act declares that this is not entirely mine. At first, the offering may remain formal, but repetition exposes contradiction. What does it mean to offer food while wasting it, offer money while breaking financial promises, offer flowers while treating living bodies without reverence, or surrender symbolically while controlling every relationship? The formal offering creates a standard that judges the rest of life. The offering is completed not when the substance reaches the altar, but when the movement of return enters ordinary possession. From representation to participation. At the beginning, ritual may feel representational. The deity is symbolized, the cosmos diagrammed, and the body made to imitate sacred forms. The practitioner performs actions signifying truths not yet directly known. With maturity, representation may deepen into participation. The deity is not merely represented but encountered through the act. The mandala becomes not merely a diagram but a field entered bodily and inwardly. Mantra becomes lived sound, offering actual relinquishment, and the body not merely a metaphorical temple, but an inhabited one. This shift does not require crude literalism. It concerns the quality of involvement. The practitioner no longer stands outside the rite, translating each element into an idea. They have entered its world sufficiently that symbol, action, perception, and reality participate in one another. In mature tantric ritual, the practitioner may move from worshipping deity as external to invoking deity, identifying with deity, and recognizing that worshipper, worship, and worshipped arise within one field of consciousness. Ritual does not merely explain non-separation, it enacts a passage through differentiation toward recognition, interiorization, and expansion. As practice deepens, external action acquires an inward correspondence. The altar becomes center, fire becomes transformative attention, offering becomes thought, breath, identity, or action. Deity becomes inwardly present. Mantra continues beyond vocal repetition, and mandala becomes a structure of consciousness. Interiorization need not replace outer ritual. Outer form provides stability, precision, and transmission, while inward form provides immediacy and depth. Interiorization prevents the practitioner from imagining that sacred action exists only within ceremonial performance. The rite begins to continue when the implements are absent. A breath recalls mantra, a meal evokes offering, a gesture carries consecrated attention, and a difficult interaction reveals whether the actual other person belongs within the mandala. The mature operation of ritual is therefore expansion. The altar teaches center, and the practitioner learns to act from a center. Mantra teaches consecrated speech, and ordinary words become more responsible. Offering teaches relinquishment, and money, food, time, and labor are handled differently. Nyasa teaches embodied divinity, and health, sexuality, illness, and limits receive deeper care. Mandala teaches relational wholeness, and others are no longer experienced merely as interruptions. Sacred time teaches recurrence, and stable rhythms begin to protect what matters. The formal rite becomes a concentrated grammar for life. This does not mean that every action is declared sacred automatically. It means that every action becomes answerable to the sacred. Realized ritual consciousness does not say that whatever the practitioner does is divine. It says that nothing they do falls outside consecration, consequence, and responsibility. Enacted non-separation. The highest fruit of the ritual-sacramental mode is not merely disciplined character, it is enacted non-separation. The practitioner begins by acting toward the sacred as something distinct. They prepare, approach, invoke, offer, identify, and internalize. Eventually, the boundaries among practitioner, deity, act, body, substance, and world become transparent. The ritual is no longer merely a bridge between two realities. It reveals one field through differentiated participation. The practitioner does not merely know that body and deity are non-separate, but inhabits the body as sacred presence. They do not merely understand the world as mandala, but begin to act from within that perception. They do not merely believe life is offering, the structure of action itself becomes less privately owned. At this point, ritual becomes realization rather than preparation for realization. The sacred pattern has passed through repetition into perception, embodiment, identity, and spontaneous conduct. The mature fruit. The mature ritual sacramental practitioner may continue to perform elaborate ceremonies and preserve exact sounds, gestures, sequences, and inherited forms with great care. Technical performance, however, is no longer their primary proof. Maturity appears in the way ritual has crossed the altar's boundary. The practitioner becomes disciplined without rigidity, precise without control, faithful without compulsion, embodied without making a cult of bodily power, respectful of transmission without becoming a gatekeeper, and capable of repetition without treating quantity as attainment. They can adapt the vessel when adaptation protects the living pattern, and can recognize sacred participation beyond their authorized form. Their body becomes more conscious, speech more truthful, handling of matter more careful, relation to time more deliberate, promises more binding, service more embodied, and ordinary conduct more integrated. Formal ritual no longer compensates for an unexamined life. It intensifies a consecration already spreading through it. The highest fruit may therefore be called continuous consecration. The sacred is no longer confined to selected objects, hours, gestures, and spaces. Every body matters, every place can reveal center, and every responsibility can become worship. The rite begins at the altar. Its mature fruit is the disappearance of the profane remainder. Distortion and self-sealing. The ritual sacramental mode becomes dangerous not because form is false, but because form is powerful. Repeated action shapes the body, transmitted sequence carries intelligence across generations, mantra reorganizes attention, temples preserve worlds, vows sustain commitment beyond emotion, and complex rites gather body, speech, imagination, memory, matter, metaphysics, and community within one coordinated field. These are genuine achievements, yet ritual possesses a peculiar vulnerability. Its visible elements can be preserved, repeated, perfected, measured, and transmitted even when the consciousness they signify has not appeared. The hands move correctly, the mantra is pronounced, the sequence completed, the lineage maintained, the altar preserved, the count increased, and the institution survives. Everything visible confirms continuity, while the practitioner may remain fundamentally unchanged. The central distortion of the mode is the confusion of performing sacred form with realizing what the form enacts. The rite ceases to serve transformation and becomes evidence that transformation must already have occurred. The mechanical contract. At its most self-sealing, ritual becomes a contract between measurable effort and guaranteed spiritual result. The practitioner supplies repetition, duration, technical exactness, obedience, sacrifice, continuity, and loyalty to the method. The system appears to promise purification, vision, power, divine contact, bodily transformation, liberation, or certainty of ultimate success. The logic becomes transactional. I completed what was required, and therefore the promised fruit belongs to me. This is attractive because ritual effort is concrete. The practitioner can point to years, hours, vows, initiations, completed ceremonies, and enormous counts. The invisible work of transformation remains uncertain, while visible labor is undeniable. The count therefore becomes a bridge from certainty about action to certainty about realization. The bridge is false. A person may acquire endurance, concentration, memory, technical mastery, bodily control, tolerance for boredom, emotional regulation, confidence, social authority, identity, and the ability to override resistance. These are genuine capacities, but none is identical with divinization. The practitioner may become exceptionally capable of practice without becoming more capable of humility, truth, freedom, love, or participation in ordinary life. Ritual becomes mechanical when measurable effort is used to protect the immeasurable fruit from examination. When the count certifies the soul. Because ritual can be counted, quantity easily becomes a form of invisible ordination. The one who has done more must be deeper, the one who has endured longer purer, the one who has completed the rarest practice closer to the sacred, and the one who has sacrificed most spiritually superior. Effort deserves respect, and long practice often produces depth. The distortion begins when correlation becomes guarantee and spiritual reality is reorganized according to arithmetic. Dishonesty is minimized, arrogance becomes authority, rigidity becomes purity, emotional constriction becomes detachment, refusal of criticism becomes firmness in truth, and mistreatment of others becomes an unfortunate personality detail, supposedly unrelated to attainment. The ritual count remains sovereign, and ordinary life is not allowed to contradict it. The completed rite can be measured. Transformation cannot. Confusing them permits quantity to overrule evidence. The fortified ritual ego. Ritual does not necessarily dissolve the ego. It may train and strengthen the part of the ego most capable of discipline. The practitioner becomes focused, restrained, technically competent, enduring, and certain. Such qualities may support realization, but they may also construct an unusually resilient spiritual identity. The person becomes the one who rises while others sleep, continues when others abandon, performs what others cannot perform, knows what outsiders cannot know, possesses authorization, guards a rare tradition, and has earned a status unavailable to ordinary people. This ego is not merely indulgent, it is ascetic, exact, sacrificial, and difficult to challenge. It can endure discomfort to preserve itself, convert doubt into renewed practice, interpret lack of fruit as a demand for greater quantity, and treat criticism as evidence that the critic lacks qualification. The practitioner may bow constantly while inwardly standing above those who do not bow correctly. Humility becomes part of the costume of superiority, and submission coexists with rank. Spiritual identity becomes especially durable because it is built from real sacrifice. The ritual ego is dangerous precisely because it can mistake discipline of the self for the disappearance of self-possession. Complexity as authority. Elaborate ritual systems can demand extraordinary memory, precision, intelligence, and patience. Their complexity may be genuine and meaningful because every element preserves a relation within a larger whole. Difficulty, however, creates an aura. What is hard to learn appears spiritually deep, what few can perform appears spiritually elevated, and what requires initiation appears metaphysically inaccessible to the uninitiated. technical competence begins to function as spiritual authority. The practitioner no longer says only that they know how to perform a rite. They imply that they know the reality the rite expresses. These are different achievements. One may master a language without becoming wise in what has been written through it, reproduce an architectural plan without sharing the architect's vision, or execute a musical composition without entering its depth. Likewise, the ritual expert may possess the vessel without possessing its contents. This distinction is humiliating because technical mastery is visible and realization difficult to certify. The system therefore has an incentive to collapse them. The expert becomes the realized one, the authorized performer the spiritual authority, and the custodian of detail the supposed embodiment of essence. Initiation as identity. Initiation may establish relationship, responsibility, transmission, symbolic death, or entry into a sacred body larger than the individual. It can also become possession. The practitioner begins to define themselves through having received what others have not. They are initiated, belong to the lineage, possess the mantra, have crossed the threshold, and enjoy access unavailable to outsiders. The rite intended to destabilize ordinary identity becomes the foundation of a superior sacred identity. This intensifies within secret or graded traditions, where each threshold creates another title, rank, authorization, or identity to inhabit. The practitioner becomes invested in credentials, transmission rights, proximity to the teacher, and ritual status. Initiation then ceases to be the beginning of transformation and becomes evidence that transformation is already implied. The outer threshold is crossed, and the inner crossing is presumed. Custodianship, becoming ownership. Ritual traditions need custodians. Pronunciations must be preserved, texts transmitted, temples maintained, and students trained. Custodianship is therefore a genuine virtue. The custodian understands that the form does not belong only to them, but has been received and must be carried responsibly. The distortion begins when custody becomes ownership. The person entrusted with the door begins to believe that the reality behind the door belongs to them. Access to a method becomes control over access to the sacred. Secrecy becomes power. Qualification becomes caste. Transmission becomes monopoly, and questioning becomes disloyalty. Alternative forms of depth become threatening because they reveal that sacred reality may not be controlled by the custodial structure. The institution protects not only the vessel, but its exclusive claim to significance. The gatekeeper identifies the sacred with the vessel and the vessel with themselves. Repetition becoming compulsion. Ritual teaches continuation through resistance, yet this strength can reverse into self-violence. The practitioner learns to interpret fatigue, illness, emotional collapse, injury, responsibility, and bodily limits merely as obstacles to overcome. The ability to override the body becomes proof of attainment. Adaptation becomes weakness, rest impurity, and the vow more sacred than the life it was meant to consecrate. The practitioner no longer performs the ritual. Ritual identity compels them to continue it. This may be praised as heroic fidelity, and sometimes it is. At other times, it is fear. Stopping may expose that the practice no longer gives meaning, identity, belonging, or hope. The rite must therefore continue because too much of the self has been built around continuation. A living discipline carries the practitioner beyond mood. A dead discipline demands continuation after it has ceased to return them to anything but obligation. The sacred enclosure, protecting the profane remainder. The purpose of ritual is to allow sacred form to expand into life. Distortion reverses this movement. The practitioner perfects the ritual enclosure while ordinary conduct remains untouched. Mantra is flawless, but ordinary speech remains dishonest or cruel. The body is consecrated, but exhaustion, illness, sexuality, and vulnerability are ignored. Offerings are elaborate, while money, labor, debt, and promises remain governed by possession. The deity is treated with exquisite tenderness, while living people are treated as interruptions. The mandala is entered with precision, while relationships remain shaped by control, contempt, and exclusion. Ritual then becomes compensation. The sacred enclosure permits the practitioner to feel divinized without exposing the rest of life to consecration. The more elaborate the rite becomes, the easier it may be to experience spiritual completion, while the profane remainder survives intact. The altar becomes a place where sacredness is concentrated so ordinary life can remain unchanged. Form becoming immune to fruit. A self-sealing ritual system interprets every outcome as confirmation. If transformation occurs, the rite works. If it does not, more repetition is required. illness becomes purification, strength divine power, good conduct confirmation of attainment, cruelty and expression beyond ordinary understanding, institutional flourishing a blessing, and decline evidence that the age is corrupt and preservation must become stricter. If outsiders display depth, their experience remains incomplete without authorization. If insiders lack depth, the lineage remains perfect despite human weakness. The system cannot lose because no evidence can reach its central claim. The rite is no longer tested by its fruits. Its assumed validity interprets every fruit in advance. The practitioner is protected from admitting that the method may not have produced what was promised, while the institution is protected from admitting that it preserved form while losing consciousness. A sacred claim becomes self-sealing when it can explain every outcome but be corrected by none. The counterfeit personality. The counterfeit personality of this mode may be called the authorized custodian of sacred correctness. Such a person may be disciplined, knowledgeable, sincere, hardworking, and sacrificial. Deliberate fraud is not required. Their identity is organized around correctness, qualification, continuity, difficulty, purity, authorization, and exclusion of error. They protect the tradition from dilution, but may also protect themselves from reality. They can identify a technical mistake immediately while remaining unable to recognize cruelty, narcissism, fear, or sterility within an authorized practitioner. The visible vessel becomes more real than the invisible fruit. They know exactly how the ritual should be performed, but may no longer know how to recognize whether ritual has become life. The ritual sacramental path begins with the promise that sacred form can transform the whole person. Its deepest reversal occurs when the practitioner uses sacred form to protect the person from transformation. The ceremony becomes proof, the count identity, initiation status, lineage immunity, complexity authority, and institutional endurance evidence that the current remains alive. Form no longer opens the practitioner to the sacred, it seals them inside the claim that the sacred has already been attained. Living ritual submits form to transformation. Dead ritual submits every evidence of non-transformation to the authority of form. The shadow is immense, because nearly every visible feature of genuine ritual can remain. Sounds, gestures, buildings, initiations, authority, transmission, and repetition. Only transformation is absent, and because transformation was never easily measurable, its absence may be the final reality the ritual world is prepared to acknowledge. Testing it in life. The ritual sacramental mode makes one of the boldest claims in spiritual life. Sacred form can transform the whole person. The test must therefore be equally severe. Ritual may produce concentration, endurance, altered states, symbolic intelligence, bodily coordination, visionary experience, technical competence, emotional regulation, belonging, and strong identity. These are real outcomes, but they are not identical. A practice may work at one level without establishing every claim attached to it. The decisive question is not merely whether ritual produces something, but what it produces, what remains untouched, and whether the sacred pattern crosses the boundary of formal performance. Ritual is tested wherever ritual ends. Speech, promises, and possession. The quality of mantra is tested in ordinary speech. Does the practitioner speak more truthfully, keep confidences, avoid manipulation, restrain needless cruelty, listen, admit uncertainty, and use silence without turning it into punishment? If every word is capable of mantra, ordinary language cannot remain spiritually neutral. Perfect pronunciation does not compensate for repeated lying. The test extends to promises. Ritual is built from sequence, commitment, and return. Has this made the practitioner more reliable outside the rite? Do they arrive when they said they would, repay what they owe, complete responsibilities, inform others when they cannot, and treat another person's time as something real? A vow before a deity may feel elevated, while a small promise to another person may reveal far more about whether ritual fidelity has become character. Possession provides another test. What has offering done to the practitioner's relation to money, food, labor, property, and status? Can they give without theatricality, receive without entitlement, use resources responsibly, pay fairly, and avoid hiding exploitation behind spiritual service? Formal offerings may be abundant while workers, relatives, students, or dependents bear their hidden cost. The truth of offering is tested by what the practitioner refuses to appropriate outside the altar. Body, care, and vulnerability. The ritual-sacramental mode frequently declares the body divine, consecrated, or identical with the sacred field. Life tests what this means. Does the practitioner listen to exhaustion, seek medical care, respect injury, treat sexuality without contempt or exploitation, allow age to change practice, and rest when continued strain becomes destructive? Or is the body sacred only when obedient to the rite? The body may be idealized symbolically and violated practically. Severe practice may sometimes be consciously chosen and meaningful, but dissociation, chronic depletion, and disregard for illness cannot automatically be justified through the language of discipline. The body is not merely the instrument through which ritual achievement is displayed, it is part of what has been entrusted. The same test applies to other bodies. How are children, the ill, the elderly, the disabled, the exhausted, and the dependent treated? Can care interrupt formal practice without being experienced merely as an obstacle? Feeding a child, preparing medicine, cleaning a wound, washing clothes, maintaining a home, and sitting beside someone who is ill may lack ceremonial prestige, yet they contain the sacramental structure directly. Time is offered, matter handled, attention gathered, self-interest interrupted, and embodied life served. If the ritualist cannot recognize sacred participation in concrete care, sacramental perception remains enclosed. Power, authority, and repair. Ritual traditions create authority. Teachers transmit, priests officiate, initiators authorize, custodians preserve, and experts interpret. The test is how such power is used. Does authority serve participation or demand dependence? Can students question? Can harm be named without being translated into purification? Can someone leave without being treated as spiritually contaminated? Can transmission occur without the teacher claiming ownership of the student's inner life? Can an institution distinguish criticism from desecration? The mature practitioner should become more answerable for power, not less. If every action belongs to sacred order, manipulation matters. If every body is consecrated, violation matters. If every word participates, coercive speech matters. No practitioner becomes flawless, so another test is what follows failure. Can harm be admitted plainly? Can apology occur without metaphysical evasion? Can restitution be made? Can a structure that repeatedly produces harm be revised? Can the practitioner tolerate discovering that years of discipline left a major area untouched? Repair is itself sacramental because it restores relation through embodied action. Confession without changed conduct remains symbolic, and apology without restitution may protect the image of humility rather than repair what was damaged. The willingness to repair reveals whether truth matters more than the identity of attainment. Fidelity, adaptation, and compulsion. A living ritual must carry the practitioner through boredom, resistance, and dryness, but it must also remain capable of responding to reality. Not every difficult period means a practice should be abandoned. Some of its deepest fruits appear through long continuity when nothing dramatic occurs. Yet no form earns permanent immunity from examination merely because it was once sacred. Does discipline deepen the person or merely deplete them? Does resistance reveal avoidance or does it signal that the form has become harmful, empty, or misaligned? Does adaptation preserve the living pattern or merely provide convenience? Does refusal to adapt express fidelity or fear of losing identity? A mature practice distinguishes the center of the form from its contingent vessel. Illness may require a shorter rite, parenthood, another schedule, age, another posture, disability, another bodily expression, and historical conditions, different substances or structures. Adaptation is not automatically dilution, and rigidity is not automatically fidelity. Fidelity preserves what the form is for. Compulsion preserves the form after its purpose has been lost. Fruit and correction. Ritual can produce concentration, endurance, memory, bodily control, altered states, symbolic intelligence, devotional warmth, confidence, belonging, and technical competence. These proximal fruits must be named accurately. Was concentration mistaken for realization, endurance for freedom, belonging for transmission, confidence for clarity, emotional intensity for divinization, visionary experience for ethical maturity, or technical mastery for awakened participation? A mature tradition distinguishes what a practice demonstrably produces from what it ultimately claims to produce. The fact that a practice works at one level does not prove every interpretation attached to it. Correction is therefore essential. A living ritual remains answerable to experience, consequence, ethical judgment, embodiment, and changing circumstances. This does not mean traditional forms must submit instantly to modern preference. It means no form may declare itself beyond every possible test. Can the practitioner admit that a rite was performed accurately but did not produce what was expected, that an interpretation was mistaken, that a teacher preserved form but failed ethically, that a practice gave endurance while intensifying rigidity, that an institution maintained continuity while losing something essential, or that adaptation has become necessary? The ability to correct interpretation without despising form is one of the clearest signs of ritual maturity. Freedom beyond the group. Ritual creates belonging. Shared meals, festivals, morning practices, initiations, calendars, songs, processions, and life cycle rites place the individual within a world larger than private biography. Birth is welcomed, adulthood recognized, marriage witnessed, death mourned, and memory repeated. This can provide profound stability. The rite can also become a border separating the spiritually real from the spiritually invisible. Those inside are recognized, while outsiders become incomplete, impure, uninitiated, or profane. The mature practitioner can honor the specificity of a form without treating the sacred as communal property. Can they recognize living ritual beyond their lineage, see depth within another liturgy, acknowledge sacramental intelligence in ordinary care, and encounter unfamiliar forms without immediately ranking them as inferior because they lack familiar authorization? A tradition may have legitimate reasons for restricting certain practices. Not every rite can be detached from preparation, context, or responsibility. Restriction of method, however, does not imply ownership of sacred reality. A lineage may guard a door, it does not own the sky beyond it. The test of spontaneity. Ritual begins through form, while maturity appears partly through spontaneous conduct. Has repeated reverence become natural? Has the body learned steadiness? Has generosity become less theatrical? Has truthful speech become less effortful? Does attention return without constant external command? Can the person act sacramentally in situations for which no sequence was prescribed? The goal is not permanent self-monitoring. A person who interprets every movement as ritual may become artificial and self-conscious. The deeper fruit is embodied intelligence. Like a musician who no longer calculates every note, the practitioner no longer imposes sacredness upon the moment from outside. Form has entered deeply enough for action to become spontaneous without becoming unconscious. Living and dead ritual. The distinction between living and dead ritual cannot be reduced to emotion. A living rite may feel dry, and a dead rite exhilarating. The deeper distinction concerns movement. Living ritual continues to reveal, remains open to correction, deepens embodiment, expands into life, strengthens responsibility, and brings the practitioner into a more truthful relation with body, matter, others, and world. It preserves form without confusing form with fruit, and carries the practitioner through resistance while returning them more deeply to life. Dead ritual survives through fear, obligation, status, or identity. It interprets every consequence as confirmation, insulates itself from ethical judgment, preserves the sacred enclosure while life remains untouched, and values continuation more than transformation. It demands loyalty after the act has ceased to disclose anything, returning the practitioner only to the necessity of repeating it again. Living ritual carries the practitioner through resistance and returns them more deeply to life. Dead ritual returns them only to obligation. The final test. The ritual-sacramental path begins by setting apart a sacred field. The final test is what happens outside it. Has speech changed? Has the relation to money changed? Has power become more responsible, care more embodied, reliability deeper, repair more possible, freedom wider, and humility more visible? Can the practitioner recognize sacred participation beyond authorized form? The question is not whether every failure has disappeared, but whether the direction of formation is visible. Does the rite increasingly become life, or does life remain protected from the meaning of the rite? Has the sacred enclosure expanded until ordinary life has become answerable to consecration, or has the enclosure merely become more elaborate while the profane remainder survives untouched? The quality of mantra is tested in ordinary speech. The truth of offering is tested in possession. Divinization of the body is tested in illness and care. The reality of the mandala is tested in relationship. The depth of initiation is tested in responsibility. The authenticity of transmission is tested in the consciousness it produces. The meaning of fidelity is tested in whether discipline deepens freedom rather than captivity. The rite may begin before an altar. Its fruit must eventually appear wherever the practitioner stands. Traditions, personal exemplars, and configurations. The ritual-sacramental mode appears wherever spiritual truth is entrusted to repeated embodied form. Its expressions differ enormously. Some traditions center upon sacrifice, others upon liturgy, mantra, mandala, mudra, initiation, household observance, sacred meals, mourning, communal memory, or disciplined embodiment. Some employ splendor and complexity, while others work through austerity and reduction. Some understand ritual as divine service, others as cosmic participation, awakened activity, covenant, hospitality, or the consecration of ordinary life. These traditions and figures do not express an identical theology, nor does the ritual-sacramental mode necessarily constitute the whole of their spiritual identity. What joins them is a shared intuition. The sacred is not merely contemplated or believed, but entered through forms capable of shaping body, speech, perception, action, and time. Tantra, the complete ritual grammar. Tantric traditions offer one of the clearest expressions of ritual sacramental consciousness because they coordinate body, speech, imagination, space, substance, deity, and identity directly. Mantra gives sacred consciousness sound. Yantra or mandala gives it spatial articulation. Mudra gives it bodily form. Nyasa places sacred powers and identities into embodiment. Visualization makes divine form inwardly immediate. Puja gathers these elements into enacted worship. Initiation introduces the practitioner into a transmitted field, and repetition allows the pattern to pass from deliberate construction into embodied intelligence. The practitioner does not merely contemplate a doctrine about divine reality. Body, speech, attention, and world are ritually reconstructed according to it. The deity is invoked not only as an object of belief or devotion, but through sound, image, breath, bodily placement, consecrated matter, and disciplined action. The rite creates an entire environment within which another identity and another perception of reality can be entered. At maturity, this ritual grammar begins to expand beyond formal ceremony. Every word becomes potentially mantra, every place potentially mandala, every gesture potentially mudra, and every action potentially offering. Tantra expresses the ritual sacramental promise with unusual directness. The whole human being can become an instrument through which sacred consciousness acts. Its danger is equally direct. Because the vessel is so elaborate, technical mastery can create a powerful appearance of attainment. Complexity, initiation, secrecy, transmission, and unusual ritual capacities may construct an exceptionally strong spiritual identity while leaving ordinary perception, relationship, and conduct substantially unchanged. Shrividya, the cosmos as worship. Shrividya is among the most complete ritual sacramental configurations because goddess, mantra, geometry, body, initiation, visualization, hierarchy, offering, devotion, and non-dual recognition are gathered within one architecture. The Shrikakra is not simply an image to admire or a diagram representing a doctrine. It gives spatial and ritual form to emanation and return, distinction and unity, multiplicity and center. The practitioner moves through its enclosures, placing powers, deities, body, cosmos, and divine center into relation. Through mantra, visualization, worship, and bodily participation, the diagram becomes an inhabitable sacred world. Its complexity can possess genuine dignity. Each mantra, enclosure, offering, and placement may preserve a relation within the larger whole. The ceremony does not accumulate elements merely to appear esoteric. At its best, it makes an entire sacred cosmos ritually traversable, yet the ritual cannot remain a perfect cosmos surrounded by an unconsecrated life. The center must eventually be recognized beyond the diagram. The goddess installed within the ritual body must be encountered within actual embodiment, and the powers honored ceremonially must begin to shape speech, possession, authority, sexuality, care, and relationship. Shravidya therefore reveals both the height and the characteristic danger of ritual consciousness. Its height lies in allowing sound, geometry, body, devotion, and metaphysics to become one act. Its danger lies in mistaking command of this extraordinary act for the transformation it promises. Bhaskararaya, ritual knowledge made inhabitable. Bhaskararaya embodies the ritual sacramental mind through the depth with which he inhabited and interpreted the world of Shravidya. In his work, mantra, worship, theology, bodily practice, external ceremony, and internal realization are not treated as unrelated domains. Ritual form is interpreted from within, so that technical precision and metaphysical meaning can become dimensions of one practice. This is a distinctive form of ritual intelligence. The technician knows how the act is performed. The scholar knows its textual and symbolic background. The theologian explains what it means. The mature upasaka seeks to enter the reality in which sound, deity, visualization, bodily placement, offering, and recognition become one field of participation. Bhaskararaya therefore represents the possibility of ritual scholarship that does not remain outside its subject. Explanation serves inhabitation. Precision does not merely catalog the rite, but makes its internal order transparent enough to be entered consciously. The highest ritual knowledge does not merely describe the sacred form, it reveals how the form can become a world in which the practitioner lives. Yet the achievement contains its own historical vulnerability. When a great practitioner interprets and codifies an intricate tradition, later generations can inherit the explanation more easily than the consciousness that made it luminous. The texts remain, the correspondences remain, and the ritual sequences remain, while the capacity to inhabit them may weaken. The greatness of the vessel can then become the very reason its preservation is mistaken for realization. Vedic sacrifice, receiving and returning. Vedic sacrificial traditions express the ritual mode through offering, fire, sound, priestly precision, cosmic order, reciprocity, and circulation. Food, fertility, weather, speech, community, ancestors, and divine powers exist within a pattern of reception and return. Life is neither privately generated nor absolutely possessed. It is sustained through participation in a larger exchange. The offering places this insight into action. Something concrete is relinquished and entrusted to the transforming fire. Gratitude, dependence, and participation are not left as inward sentiments. They acquire substance, gesture, sequence, and cost. This structure can become mechanical when correct performance is expected to compel a cosmic response. The sacred becomes contract, offering becomes payment, and precision becomes leverage. Yet beneath this distortion lies a deeper ritual intuition. What has been received cannot be possessed without remainder, and participation requires return. Sacrifice teaches that life is sustained not by possession alone, but through circulation, reciprocity, and offering. Jewish ritual life, sanctification of the ordinary. Jewish ritual life offers one of the clearest examples of sacred form expanding into ordinary existence. The sacred enters food, household, weekly rhythm, blessing, rest, work, family, memory, mourning, celebration, bodily practice, and ethical obligation. The Sabbath is especially powerful as an expression of qualitative time. Work ceases, and time does not merely contain a different set of activities, it acquires another character. The household becomes a sacred field in which food, light, family, rest, blessing, and memory are gathered into a recurring form. Blessings before food teach that nourishment is received rather than simply consumed. The ritual calendar gives communal memory a body. Morning practices carry people through experiences for which spontaneous expression may be inadequate. Household observance allows ordinary conduct to become an arena of covenant and responsibility, rather than a profane interval between explicitly religious acts. This configuration demonstrates that ritual sacramental consciousness does not require esoteric complexity or spectacular ceremony. the whole life may be shaped through disciplined recurrence. Its danger is legalistic enclosure, in which forms remain while their ethical and spiritual depth contracts. At its height, however, ritual does not remove the practitioner from ordinary life. It makes ordinary life itself answerable to remembrance, gratitude, restraint, and covenant. Kukai and the Three Mysteries. Kukai offers one of the clearest personal expressions of ritual sacramental consciousness, because embodied form stands near the center of his understanding of awakening rather than at its preparatory edge. Within Shingon, body, speech, and mind are coordinated through mudra, mantra, and mandala. These three mysteries correspond to the embodied activity of awakened reality itself, so practice becomes more than symbolic imitation. The practitioner's own body, speech, and mind are aligned with the activity of Mahavairocana. Buddhahood is therefore not approached solely as a distant state to be attained after the transcendence of embodiment. The body forms mudra, speech sounds mantra, and mind enters the mandala through visualization. Image, language, gesture, and bodily action are not concessions to practitioners incapable of pure contemplation. They become vehicles of direct participation. Embodied action can become awakened action because body, speech, and mind already arise within the reality they seek to recognize. The danger appears when this coordination is reduced to technical replication. Mudra can be copied, mantra memorized, and mandala studied while the practitioner remains inwardly divided. The visible forms of the three mysteries survive, but their mutual participation is lost. What was intended as the coordinated embodiment of awakening becomes a checklist of authorized actions. Christian liturgy and sacramental matter. Catholic and Orthodox traditions give matter, body, sacred time, historical memory, and communal worship a deeply sacramental role. Bread, wine, water, oil, incense, image, architecture, vestment, sound, gesture, and calendar do not function only as illustrations of theological ideas. They participate in a liturgical world through which sacred history is remembered and entered. The Eucharist is not understood merely as an intellectual reminder, it is an act of participation. The liturgical year repeatedly carries the community through incarnation, suffering, death, resurrection, mourning, descent, ascent, and celebration. The individual does not reconstruct a spiritual journey from private mood each day, but enters a rhythm larger than personal biography. The body stands, kneels, bows, crosses itself, sings, receives, and moves through ordered space. Faith is not confined to inward conviction. Water baptizes, oil anoints, food becomes sacramental, and architecture organizes mystery, orientation, presence, and communal gathering. The shadow appears when liturgical correctness or institutional continuity becomes evidence of living faith. A church may preserve magnificent forms, while ordinary conduct contradicts its sacramental theology. Yet, at its height, Christian liturgy demonstrates how a community can be formed through repeated participation in sacred history, embodied action, matter, and time. John of Kronstadt, The Liturgy Returning to the World. John of Kronstadt offers a visceral Christian example of ritual sacramental consciousness, because the divine liturgy and Eucharist were not peripheral obligations within his life, but its organizing center. Liturgical participation flowed outward into pastoral care, prayer, teaching, charity, and sustained engagement with suffering. The rite did not remain enclosed within ceremonial correctness. The Eucharistic movement of receiving life as gift, offering the world in thanksgiving, and participating bodily in divine presence became the center from which he returned to human need. Liturgy did not protect him from poverty, illness, disorder, and dependence. It repeatedly sent him back into them. His life therefore reveals what sacramental expansion can look like. The chalice does not diminish the importance of ordinary bodies, it intensifies it. Communion with Christ cannot remain detached from the people who wait outside the sanctuary, interrupt the schedule, or require material help. Presence encountered through consecrated matter demands another way of encountering suffering flesh. The deepest proof of sacramental participation is not what occurs before the altar alone, but what the altar makes possible when the practitioner turns back toward the world. This does not mean that charitable activity can verify every mystical or theological claim associated with liturgy. It means that the relation between liturgy and life becomes visible. Formal sacrament does not compensate for an abandoned world. It becomes the form through which the practitioner is returned to it. Japanese tea ceremony, the ordinary act made complete. The Japanese tea ceremony offers a restrained and largely non-theistic configuration of ritual sacramental consciousness. Its materials are ordinary: water, fire, tea, vessels, cleaning, entry, posture, serving, and receiving. Form transforms them by slowing and clarifying movement, preparing space, placing host and guest within an ordered relationship, and refusing to treat any object or gesture as negligible. The bowl matters, the threshold matters, the sequence matters, and the relation between host and guest matters. Ritual depth does not arise because the activity is metaphysically grand, but because the act is entered without remainder. Its mature fruit is not obsession with etiquette. It is a body capable of handling ordinary things with presence, and a mind capable of entering an ordinary encounter without demanding novelty or spectacle. Complexity is not the essence of ritual. Its essence is embodied participation through form. The tea ceremony therefore provides an important counterweight to elaborate esoteric systems. A sacred world may be disclosed through thousands of correspondences, but it may also be disclosed through the complete handling of one bowl. Martial arts as structural analog. Martial arts are not inherently religious rites, but they reveal the ritual operation with unusual clarity. The practitioner returns to the same place, movements, forms, corrections, and disciplines across changing moods. Progress does not depend upon inspiration because repetition shapes the body beneath conscious intention. At first, each movement must be remembered. Later, the sequence becomes coordinated. Eventually, form can arise spontaneously in response to actual conditions. The form does not disappear, it becomes embodied. A martial form is dead when reproduced mechanically without awareness or responsiveness. It remains living when repetition produces balance, precision, adaptability, freedom, and actual capacity. Technical correctness is tested by reality. Can the practitioner move, respond, and remain present under pressure? The analogy is precise. A beautiful ritual form that produces no sacramental capacity remains incomplete. Ritual cannot appeal indefinitely to technical correctness if ordinary embodiment, action, and perception remain untouched. Martial practice also demonstrates how formal discipline leaves the training hall. Posture, attention, movement, and response change. Ritual similarly leaves the altar not by abandoning form, but by allowing form to enter the person deeply enough to continue elsewhere. Domestic care as sacramental form. One of the most important ritual configurations is easily overlooked because it lacks ceremonial prestige. Daily care can acquire sacramental depth through repetition, bodily service, careful handling of matter, sacrifice of time, reliability, and response to vulnerability. Feeding a child, preparing medicine, cleaning a wound, washing clothes, maintaining a household, or sitting beside someone who is ill may form a person as deeply as formal ceremony. These acts are not automatically sacred merely because they are repetitive or difficult. Their sacramental possibility lies in the gathering of body, time, matter, attention, responsibility, and relinquishment into the service of life. The mature ritualist cannot therefore rank formal ceremony as inherently superior to concrete care. A person may handle an image with perfect reverence and a dependent human body with impatience. The contradiction reveals that sacramental perception remains enclosed within authorized objects and actions. Care becomes ritual when matter, embodiment, recurrence, attention, and responsibility are gathered into a faithful act of service. After the visionary, ritual as the body of an absent presence. The ritual-sacramental mode frequently becomes central only after a visionary, prophet, saint, or charismatic founder has died. During the founder's life, a spiritual movement may be organized around direct presence. The teacher speaks, interprets events, corrects disciples, responds to changing situations, creates forms spontaneously, and embodies the teaching in a way no manual can reproduce. The original current may be visionary, devotional, prophetic, contemplative, or integrative rather than primarily ritualistic. But direct presence cannot be inherited. When the saint dies, the community faces a severe problem. How can a reality encountered through one unrepeatable life continue without that life? Words are remembered, gestures repeated, meals reenacted, places sacralized, anniversaries observed, objects preserved, stories stabilized, methods codified, roles assigned, initiations regulated, and boundaries established. The community gradually constructs repeatable forms of access to what was once encountered through living presence. After the saint dies, ritual becomes the body constructed around an absent presence. This is not necessarily a betrayal. It may be the only way fragile human beings can continue to approach what the founder disclosed. A remembered meal becomes Eucharist. A posture associated with the Buddha becomes an inherited form of practice. The songs, movements, and observances surrounding a devotional figure become liturgy and festival. A Siddha's instructions become mantra sequence, initiation, mandala, and manual. What once flowed through personal immediacy is given recurrence. Ritual therefore performs an indispensable work on behalf of time. It allows people who never encountered the founder to enter a pattern shaped by that encounter. It gives the community forms capable of surviving grief, succession, conflict, geographical expansion, and the deaths of the first witnesses. Without this transition, the movement may dissolve into memory, competing personal claims, or repeated attempts to reproduce the founder through another charismatic personality. Ritual protects a tradition from dependence upon the permanent arrival of another visionary, yet preservation creates the mode's characteristic institutional danger. Those who remember the founder's presence are gradually replaced by those who know the authorized form. Witnesses become teachers, teachers become custodians, custodians become officials, and officials become gatekeepers. The ability to reproduce the sequence grows increasingly important because the original presence can no longer correct the sequence from within. The gatekeeper may inherit the founder's authority without inheriting the founder's vision. They know which gesture is valid, who is authorized, which wording must be used, what clothing belongs to the office, where the boundaries lie, and who may approach a sacred object. Such knowledge may be necessary, but necessity easily becomes ownership. Gatekeepers inherit the door. They do not necessarily inherit what the founder saw beyond it. Preservation then becomes substitution. A spontaneous gesture becomes mandatory protocol. A response to one historical situation becomes universal law. Symbolic language hardens into literal ontology. A living form adapted freely by the founder becomes fixed because later custodians can demonstrate fidelity only by preserving what they received. Paradoxically, the gatekeepers may become more exact than the founder. The founder could alter a form because they were believed to act from the source of its authority. The custodian cannot reproduce that inward freedom, so fidelity is proved through resistance to alteration. What the founder held lightly because it remained alive, the institution holds tightly because its life can no longer be assumed. This transition is not simply corruption. A community cannot endure through improvisation alone. Stable rites protect practitioners from arbitrary claims made by every later visionary. Manuals prevent loss. Offices create continuity. Rules preserve responsibility. Shared form enables thousands of people to participate without personal intimacy with a single teacher. The problem begins when the preservers forget what preservation is for. A living succession asks whether the inherited rite can still open the perception, relationship, or transformation that first gave birth to it. A dead succession asks only whether the rite has been reproduced without deviation. The first treats form as the continuing body of a presence that exceeds it. The second treats form as a replacement for that presence. The ritual remains faithful to the founder, not when it reproduces every historical detail, but when it remains capable of awakening the reality for which those details first became necessary. This creates a permanent tension. Without preservation, the fire may disappear. Through preservation, ashes may be mistaken for fire. Can the gatekeeper recognize a living current that does not exactly resemble its inherited vessel? Can an institution revise a form whose historical purpose has vanished? Can ritual specialists admit that technical continuity has survived while spiritual perception has weakened? Can a later visionary be heard without being permitted to destroy every inherited safeguard? Can the tradition preserve the founder's world without embalming it? Ritual allows the founder's absence to become inhabitable. It can also prevent the community from admitting that the founder is absent. The mature custodian therefore serves two loyalties at once: fidelity to the received form and fidelity to the reality that gave the form birth. Enough must be preserved for the tradition to remain recognizable, but the vessel must remain transparent enough that sacred presence is not reduced to institutional permission. The custodian's task is not to manufacture another founder, nor merely to repeat the founder's gestures. It is to prevent the vessel from becoming the tomb of the current it was built to carry. Mixed configurations. The ritual mode frequently combines with other forms of spiritual consciousness. In devotional ritual configurations, offering is given to someone loved, mantra becomes a name, and image becomes presence. Love keeps ritual inwardly alive, while ritual gives love recurrence, memory, and embodiment. The shadow appears when sincerity excuses carelessness, or technical fidelity replaces living relationship. In visionary ritual configurations, symbols, deities, instructions, or sacred actions may first arise through visionary experience and later become formalized. The founder's living perception becomes inherited iconography and sequence. The danger is that later practitioners repeat the form without access to the seeing from which it arose, so revelation hardens into mandatory choreography. The deepest continuity does not consist only in copying the visionary's historical gestures, but in preserving the center from which those gestures became meaningful. In architectural ritual configurations, broad metaphysical systems become inhabitable through diagrams, hierarchies, temple structures, classifications, initiatory stages, and coordinated rites. In Abhinavagupta, ritual participates within a larger integrative architecture, joining metaphysics, aesthetics, initiation, mantra, contemplation, devotion, and liberation. Ritual is indispensable, but its meaning arises through its place within a comprehensive vision of consciousness. In communal configurations, festivals, shared meals, morning rites, initiations, calendars, and processions carry individuals within a world larger than private biography. The community preserves forms no individual could sustain alone, but the rite may also become a border that recognizes insiders while rendering outsiders spiritually invisible. Subtractive ritual works through silence, simple clothing, restricted food, prostration, confession, monastic schedules, repeated meditation, and minimal gesture. Ritual sacramental consciousness does not require splendor. Austere form can be equally powerful and equally vulnerable to becoming identity, rank, compulsion, or evidence of superiority. Across these configurations, the governing movement remains recognizable. A form is received and repeated, the body learns it, speech, space, and time are reorganized, the practitioner is carried beyond mood, the pattern becomes inwardly inhabited, and its logic begins to expand into ordinary life. The exemplar is not the expert. The ritual exemplar must not be confused with the technical expert. The expert may know sequence, language, symbolism, history, architecture, rules, and initiatory requirements. The exemplar reveals what ritual has made possible. Bhaskara represents ritual knowledge, becoming an inhabitable sacred world. Kukai represents body, speech, and mind, coordinated as direct participation in awakening. John of Kronstadt represents liturgical participation, returning to embodied service and human need. Their traditions and theological claims differ radically, but in each case, form ceases to be an external procedure and becomes an organizing medium of spiritual life. The mature exemplar demonstrates fidelity without compulsion, precision without rigidity, reverence for body and matter, responsibility in speech, integrity in ordinary commitments, humility before the sacred, and freedom from ownership of tradition. Such a practitioner may preserve demanding ceremonies with great exactness, but the clearest evidence of their maturity appears when no ceremony is visibly occurring. How do they respond to interruption, handle weakness, use authority, care for another person, repair harm, and inhabit ordinary time? Ritual becomes real when the practitioner no longer requires ceremonial enclosure in order to remain answerable to the sacred. Return to proportion. Human beings do not live by insight alone. The mind understands and forgets, the heart opens and closes, vision appears and fades, and resolve weakens under fatigue, fear, grief, distraction, and ordinary necessity. What appears absolute in 1 hour may become distant in the next. The ritual sacramental mind refuses to build spiritual life upon this instability alone. It gives commitment, an hour, a place, a sound, a gesture, a sequence, a bodily effort, and a form that can be entered again. The practitioner returns not because every return feels profound, but because what matters must receive more than occasional intensity. It must receive life. Ritual gives fidelity a body and gives realization duration. Without form, revelation may remain memory, love remain emotion, philosophy remain abstraction, and intention remain unrealized possibility. Ritual asks what spiritual truth becomes when it enters the hands, tongue, breath, posture, calendar, household, body, and repeated action. It refuses to leave the sacred merely inward. The lamp must be lit, the mantra spoken, the offering made, the body positioned, the hour surrendered, and the threshold crossed. The practitioner must arrive. The rightful power of form. Form is not the enemy of spirit, because without form, spirit cannot enter time. A teaching requires words, a vision image, a community shared actions, a commitment recurrence, grief, a vessel, memory repetition, love service, and the body practice. Even the rejection of ritual creates rituals of its own, preferred postures, repeated phrases, sacred books, forms of gathering, habits of beginning and ending, and unspoken rules concerning authenticity. Human beings do not remain formless. The real question is whether form remains transparent to what it serves. A mature rite does not imprison the sacred. It gives the sacred a body through which it can be remembered, enacted, encountered, and transmitted. A mature practitioner, therefore, does not despise exactness. They understand that carelessness can disguise itself as freedom, that the body learns through repetition, that attention deepens through return, and that inherited forms may contain an intelligence the individual has not yet earned the right to dismiss. Spontaneity is not always authenticity. What arises immediately may be insight, but it may also be habit, fear, appetite, vanity, distraction, or self-protection. A transmitted form interrupts the sovereignty of present mood and asks the person to return, enact what they claim matters, give it time, and allow the form to teach what enthusiasm could not. This is not spiritual inferiority, it is one of the great disciplines of human transformation. Form must become transparent. Form cannot, however, become absolute. The vessel exists for what it carries, the schedule for fidelity, the sequence for participation, initiation for transformation, lineage for transmission, and temple for encounter. When preservation of the vessel becomes more important than its fruit, ritual reverses direction. Exactness becomes control, continuity becomes fear, transmission ownership, difficulty rank, repetition compulsion, and authorization immunity. The visible form continues while the sacred operation disappears. This is why ritual must be judged not only from within the ritual system but by life itself. Has the body become more conscious, speech more truthful, possession less absolute, authority more responsible, matter less disposable, time less careless, care more embodied, and action more integrated? Can the practitioner admit harm, revise interpretation, adapt without abandoning the center, and recognize sacred participation where familiar symbols are absent? Form is justified not merely by its preservation, but by the kind of participation it makes possible. Ritual and ethical life. The ethical tests of ritual are not external moral additions imposed upon a metaphysical path. They arise from the mode's own claims. If every word can become mantra, lying matters. If every gesture can become mudra, violence matters. If every body is temple, violation matters. If every being belongs to the mandala, humiliation matters. If every act is offering, exploitation matters. If time is sacred, wasting another person's years through manipulation matters. If matter bears presence, treating the world as disposable matters. Ethics alone does not prove realization. A conventional person may behave decently without sacramental perception. Serious ethical failure nevertheless exposes the incompleteness of claims to total divinization. A practitioner cannot plausibly claim that the sacred pattern has entered the whole life while repeatedly excluding the areas where power, desire, money, embodiment, and other people are involved. The more complete the ritual claim, the less ordinary conduct can be dismissed as spiritually irrelevant. The ontological excess. The ritual-sacramental path must not, however, be reduced to ethical improvement, bodily discipline, or habit formation. Its claim exceeds these. Matter can become luminous, sound presence, gesture knowledge, space-articulated cosmos, and time threshold. Deity may become ritually present, the body more than a biological object, and the distinction among worshipper, act, deity, substance, and world transparent within participation. The mature ritualist is not merely a responsible person who has learned useful practices. They inhabit a world in which form itself can reveal consciousness. The flower is not handled carefully only because care is morally good. It may become an actual bearer of offering and presence. Mantra is not spoken only because disciplined speech is psychologically healthy. It may become a sonic embodiment of deity. The mandala is not only a method for organizing attention, it may become the structure through which center and multiplicity are encountered as one field. Ethical transformation tests sacramental realization, but it does not exhaust it. The rite seeks both the consecration of conduct and the transfiguration of perception. The practitioner becomes more responsible because the world is no longer inert, more careful because matter participates, more truthful because speech carries power, and more reverent toward bodies because embodiment has become sacred presence. Ethics is not substituted for ontology, it is what ontology begins to demand once it becomes lived. The ceremony and the whole life. The formal rite remains valuable and may remain indispensable. The practitioner does not necessarily graduate beyond the altar. The altar remains a concentrated center where the pattern is renewed. The appointed hour interrupts dispersal. Mantra recollects speech. Gesture recollects body. Mandala recollects relation. Offering recollects possession. Ceremony recollects the world. Yet formal action cannot remain the only place where sacred participation occurs. Ritual begins through distinction. This hour, sound, substance, gesture, body, and center. It matures through expansion. The altar was never meant to imprison sacredness, but to teach perception how to recognize center. Mantra was never meant to make ordinary speech irrelevant, but to disclose the power carried by speech. The consecrated image was never meant to make living bodies profane, but to teach that form can bear presence. Offering was never meant to substitute for relinquishment elsewhere, but to educate the movement of receiving and returning. Mandala was never meant to create a sacred diagram surrounded by a disposable world, but to disclose relation, center, and participation. The sacred enclosure is fulfilled only when it teaches the practitioner how to leave it without returning to profaneness. The final proportion. The ritual-sacramental mind occupies a necessary place among spiritual modes. It reminds the philosopher that truth must enter the body, the devotee that love requires recurrence and service, the visionary that revelation must become inhabitable after vision fades, the ascetic that discipline is carried through repeated action, the contemplative that consciousness does not float above embodiment, and the architect that a spiritual map must become a world someone can actually enter. Ritual preserves what individual feeling cannot sustain alone. It carries grief, memory, commitment, sacred time, communal identity, and embodied knowledge across generations. It gives fragility a vessel. The vessel, however, must remain transparent. The mature practitioner does not claim that completion of a rite proves transformation. They ask what repeated sacred action has made of body, speech, attention, possession, authority, perception, and relation to the world. Has form become living participation? Has repetition become embodied intelligence? Has sacred separation become expansion? Has matter become less disposable, embodiment more deeply inhabited, speech more truthful, authority more responsible, and the mandala wide enough to include the inconvenient person standing before them? The final distinction is not between formal and formless spirituality. It is between form that remains a vessel of living participation and form that has become its own object of worship. A living rite does not demand that the whole world resemble the ceremony. It allows the ceremony to reveal the sacred depth of the world. It does not declare every action divine, but makes every action answerable to divinity. It does not abolish distinctions, but makes distinction transparent to participation. It does not make the practitioner less embodied, but teaches embodiment to become conscious. The rite does not end when the implements are put away. The hands continue, speech continues, promises continue, care continues, the handling of matter continues, the use of power continues, and the relation to time continues. The ritual sacramental path begins with a simple demand. Give the sacred a form, return to it, allow the body to learn it, let repetition carry it beneath mood, let the form become transparent, let the boundary expand, and let the rite judge the life beyond the rite. Its final movement can therefore be stated simply: the practitioner first performs the rite, then the rite forms the practitioner. Finally, the whole life becomes capable of sacrament. The altar remains, but it is no longer the only center. The mantra ends, but speech remains consecrated. The offering is completed, but possession has changed. The ceremony closes. The ritual continues.